But when I knew him, his typical routine was something more like, we lived in Boulder, so in town, and he could walk to town and walk up to campus where he taught and walk home and so forth. He didn't like to drive. And so he would typically go down to, well, it depends. I mean, like some of the photographic work he did when I was with him was done on trips when we traveled, so that was a whole separate thing. But when we were at home in Boulder, he would often be working on the painting, or else he would be editing, which he edited in his office up at the University of Colorado in Boulder. So he would get up, he'd walk downtown, and he'd often, eat lunch in this restaurant where he always went, as I said, and he'd do his painting there, and he'd be there for an hour or two and do some painting. And then he'd walk up to campus, and he'd get ready for his classes, and he'd teach his classes, and in between, he'd stay maybe after class and do some editing in his office, come home late at night, go to the movies to unwind before he came home, so he wasn't crazy when he got home, because it did weird things to his head, to be in these sort of trance editing and stuff. But it was a routine like that. And then when we traveled, we often went on summers up to Vancouver Island, which is where I grew up, and we'd go up there for a few weeks in the summer, and he did a lot of filming there. And again, he'd just take his camera out on the beach, or he'd take it wherever we went. Or before that, earlier, like when the Visions and Meditation were being filmed, it was so we were on actual driving trips. I drove him it started out, he had to go to Tulsa, Oklahoma, actually, for a series of screenings and talks he was giving. And so we decided to drive there from Boulder. And he took the camera along and was filming as we went, filming out the window of the car, filming it, and I was because I hadn't been in that, area before, like I was just being like a typical tourist looking up interesting places to go and stuff, and he just came along to wherever I went and wherever I decided to go and filmed, and filmed as we went. And then that was the start of the Visions and Meditation. And then we went on another driving trip around Colorado, and he filmed at Mesa Verde, and then another one where we drove through New Mexico and Kansas and so forth, and that and then there was one a trip that we did when we were living in Toronto for a while, and he had to do some lectures in Boston, so we drove there and drove through New Hampshire, Maine, Quebec, and back to Toronto, and so that became another Visions and Meditation that he took his camera along and just filmed as we went, and then all that was edited, of course, later, at home or in his office. In between teaching, he liked to make sure that in the summer before teaching started, I know this, he always liked to, if he had some material that he'd been shooting and he wanted to get started on the editing, he liked the editing to be well underway before classes started, so that he could easily, go from classes to the editing, sort of come in and out of it and be able to continue with that work if he had got it going enough beforehand. So that was another thing he had to do.
Tip.
Oh yeah, I saw Boulder Blues when we finished it, and I felt it was a light, happy film. And this time it's a completely different film, and this happens to me quite often. Stan's films seem to be so malleable and changeable depending on the time you see it. I mean, to me, now that he's gone, it feels very much like a premonition of his death. And I don't know if that was a part of it, but you did say something about terror.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's terrifying to me. That was 10 years before his death that he shot Boulder Blues, but I think there is a truth to that Brakhage films have a sort of, there's space in them for you to move into and respond to in your own way, and you can have a different experience at different times. On the other hand, he might argue that if you studied the film closely enough, in every detail of it, it does mean specific things, that you could theoretically get to. But on the other hand, like death, the threat of death he was already making films about the threat of death when he was 22. I mean, he was. So, I mean, that goes all through his work. Has that famous line in Metaphors on Vision. What is it? That artists are primarily concerned with birth, sex, death, and the search for God. I think that's a persistent theme.
Others? Did he see Chinese series before he passed away?
No.
That film, I've seen that film 3 times, and it never changes, that one for me. That one is always very dark, and I can almost feel like the end of his life in that film. Mm-hmm. It's a really powerful film.
Have you seen Len Lye's, I think it's Particles in Space?
Yeah.
Very reminiscent of that. You know, and it's interesting because I didn't realize it at the time, but I saw the Len Lye film a while later, and of course Stan was very familiar with his work and thought very highly of his work, and I had spoken about how Len Lye did, I think if that's the film Particles in Space, when he was ill with cancer as a last testament. And I see Chinese series as in part an homage to Len Lye, or some conversation with him or something. Yeah.
In your own curatorial or writing or presentation of Stan's work, have you found the perceptions of newcomers to his work changing in any way over the past couple of decades, or the last decade? Or do people have different issues with his work?
Interesting. Yes and no. I mean, I know that when I first knew Stan, and I used to go around with him sometimes to some of the lectures he gave, and it would be really frustrating for him because he always felt like he was beginning again, you know, like for 30 years, every day beginning again, and explaining to people what he was doing, and people didn't seem to get, you know, there'd be this small group of people who obviously got it, but a lot of people didn't. There's still some of that, I guess, you know, like, but I feel that more people seem more open and more able to get it more quickly now. It seems that way to me. I don't know whether that's true or not, but I sort of have that sense of it. There's a lot of interest in different things. So, like, for example, there's a lot of interest in people putting music to the silent films and that sort of thing. And of course, it's all over the internet. I mean, there's different, you know, it's all different now. Like, there's sort of the very perverted forms of it all over the internet. But, you know, if people think they're seeing it, well, they're seeing something, you know, but if they're seeing some aspect of it, I guess. So, I don't know. What do you feel? Have you noticed a difference?
No, but it's been a while since I've been immersed in them. And, yeah. I mean, Persian series today had this remarkable, like, receding and characteristic to it. And there's Persians 2 at the start and in the middle of Persians 3 for me, which was like an effect that he had arrived at in three-dimensionality, which I hadn't seen previously. But this is a different question that I'm talking about. But I don't know. I mean, it seems to me in some ways there's a lot of, reintroduction of it constantly.
Yeah, and it's hard to know, like, with an audience. Like, if you have some audiences, it may be extremely new, and they don't know what they're in for, and they don't know how to respond, and so you have to start at the beginning in that sense. And then other audiences are much more knowledgeable, and so you have to adjust to that.
Was there anybody here who hadn't seen a film by Stan Brakhage prior to tonight?
Oh, really? Oh, that's interesting.
Did you know what you were in for?
Were you shocked? Was it hard to watch? Did you get a headache? Did you have to run away? Like, I mean, that's what people used to say, you know, like decades ago. They said, "Oh, I can't stand this." Like, or I remember one woman said to me at the Museum of Modern Art once. She came out in the middle of a show. I had left the show because I had my kids with me and they were being a problem. So then this woman came running out and she said, "Those are just beautiful paintings, but I don't understand why they're all moving by so quickly, and I would like to just look at the painting, you know." And I think that's, in a way, that's true, but it's also like sort of missing the point of the you know, the motion quality of the art.